All right, here we have the completed AC36 TB/TBX, and it's got all new filter caps. Those heater traces with the issues I discussed have been cut. New heater wires run tightly twisted on top of the board, and down here running to the output tube sockets. Instead of having the center tap from the transformer grounded, I have 200 ohm resistors, half watts, referencing the cathode, which has got about 11 to 12 volts on it, depending on the wall voltage. I cooled the factory bias down. These things tend to bias too hot. And now I've got it set, so it's about 13 watts idle dissipation when the wall voltage is 120, which is pretty much ideal. You want to be between 12 to 14 watts on an AC30 or an AC15. You just get there different ways. I've got some components changed, not just the material change, but some value changes to emulate the drift that you find in the 50, 60-year-old examples of the original JMIs. Got new coupling caps in place. Again, some values are changing to further optimize this for guitar. It's a deep subject, but Jennings and the guys were not making a guitar amp. They were making an amp for anything they could sell you to plug in, including bass, accordion, organs, whatever box could sell you. So a Jaguar keyboard, the little organs that they sold. That's a fuller frequency response they need for guitar. And when you have a whole bunch of lows that aren't necessary, you're wasting energy. So I optimize this circuit for guitar. It does not lose what you want from an AC30. It brings out all the best characteristics, and you're not losing any low end. I'm talking high pass at 36 hertz rather than a high pass at 3 hertz. So that is something which just makes the AC30 a better guitar amp. I have, as I mentioned, moved the grid stoppers here at the input and no longer have the signal going from the input along all these traces to this noisy stuff here to this preamp tube. I've got shielded cables beneath the board to those. That greatly reduces the noise. All the ground loops have been removed from the board. I have the amp on full right now, aside from the very slightest hum because the low filtering 2222. You can barely tell the amp is on at this point with the volumes off. I'm going to start with the least popular channel on this amp, the Vibrato channel. And you can hear that I've got some microphonic tubes in there. I grabbed some old RCA 7025s to put in the first preamp stage and the phase inverter, because I know those are good tubes, but I also know that those particular tubes are microphonic, which is why they are my test tubes rather than being in an amplifier somewhere. But yeah, I know that if the amp is good with those, it's going to be good with any good current production tube. And when I do the actual playing video, I'll change those out for some current production that don't have the noise floor. But I didn't want to chase my tail with an issue with a bad current production tube in these. So I know that on the 3 channels that are most important here, the 2 channels are most important, the normal and top boost and all that circuitry, those old tubes, microphonic though they are, give me a good sound. But let's start here with the vibrato channel. And I've got the vibrato set to vibrato. And here's the depth of it. That sounds okay. We'll change it to trim. That's a little bit weak, so I'm going to use this trim pot. I want to get so the trim is deep, but the vibrato doesn't thud. up there sounds right to me. So that channel sounded good. Let's go to the normal channel. I'm going to show you the difference between the gain of the input jack. So let's go to the low gain input channel on the normal, low gain input on the normal channel. Add the volume up a little bit. There is no bleed. Setting the cut control about where I want it. Go to high gain. Now you'll hear this more in the real playing video. The normal channel of an AC30 in stock form has got so much low end information and is so dark until you get the volume up a lot. And that's what the old ones did. And I changed a few things about that to put it in between the normal channel of the AC30 and the normal channel of the 15. And so it's a JMI value, and it still has tons of low end. It just isn't flubby. And I give it a little more balanced high end. Not bright, it's nowhere near the top boost brilliant channel, but it just is a much more usable balanced sound throughout the range. Turn the cut down a little bit if you want to get brighter. How bright that'll be will depend on your speakers. Right now you're hearing an ET65, but it's 6 feet to the left of the phone mic, so it's not going to be what it really sounds like. When the real playing video with the real mic, you'll get to hear it. Let's go to the brilliant / top boost channel, which is the usual star of the show for people. And I've got the treble and bass at noon. I think I've got the cut turned down a little bit too much. And that channel just sounds so much better once all the buzz and hum from the factory circuit goes away. They really dropped the ball on these, and it hurts me that people pay so much extra for these, quote, UK made amps when they were made rather poorly in the United Kingdom. It doesn't matter if it's UK, if it's a 60s sports car versus a Spitfire. You know, I love England, I love the UK. They have had varying levels of quality in their products. So there are some notorious cars from the late 60s and 70s that were all made in the UK. This is a little bit more like that than it would be a Spitfire. So we took all that stuff out, all the factory flaws, and you're left with a really good sounding version of an AC30. So what the owner's getting, and you'll hear it in a minute in the real playing video, once I change out for some quieter tubes, is an AC30, which is combining some modern components, some carbon comps where it counts. The values are that of a drifted model, say from 64, 65. with a couple of tweaks to make it less flubby, better optimized for guitar. It's got increased screen grid resistors, increased grid stoppers, and a cooled off bias. It's still biased quite high. It's biased over 100% idle dissipation. Just the factory bias goes so far as to shorten tube life in these things, and it also raises the noise floor. So current production EL84s will last really well in this. They made a factory error on this TBX. They've done it on a few, and thanks to an eagle-eyed viewer of a past video who pointed out, I didn't find it on that earlier app because I wasn't expecting Vox/Korg/Marshall to forget how to wire a tube. But they had the B plus taken from pin 2 of the rectifier tube rather than pin 8, and they are not equivalent. Pin 8 is the right place to go. So it is now getting the B plus off pin 8. This sloppy wiring here is the factory wiring on the output transformer, and I could have connected it here at pin 8, but it doesn't really matter. It's not noisy here, just because of the way transformers work. So it's very quiet. It is sound, everything that you've ever loved about the TBX is still there and more so, but all the downsides are gone. It's going to be very, very reliable. Let me put all this together and I'll set it up to a real playing video. To the owner watching this, when you get this amp back, be very, very, very careful putting the preamp tubes in, because the sockets on these TBXs are relatively fragile and it's easy to compress and mangle the tube pins. I've had to replace sockets on the last 4 or 5 of these that have come in because people have put them in wrong over the years. Yours are okay, but you have to be very careful lining everything up before you press down. So better to be absolutely sure than to damage one of these sockets, just because they weren't that great to begin with. Anything else to mention before I take it off of this view? Oh yeah, there was a tube shield along the back. So you couldn't reach around behind the amp and burn your fingers on these tubes. It does nothing to the sound of the amp. It just means that you're going to have less airflow within the cabinet, and these things get hot. And if you needed to change the tubes on a gig, you'd be out of luck. So I took it off, and unless you insist on having the damn thing, I would like to leave it off because they're garbage. They don't do anything except satisfy someone's desire to keep people from burning their fingers. And my theory on that is, if you burn your fingers once, okay. If you burn your fingers twice, that's on you. All right, I'm putting this back together, and I want to point out a pet peeve. You see these rings kind of cut into the metal panel? The nuts that come from the factory have a flat side and a curved side. And it makes sense to most people that the curved side would be up because it's prettier. The knob does not care, but if you put it so that the curved side is up, then these corners like to dig holes and just cut grooves in this metal. If you put it back on the curved side down, then those corners are elevated up off the panel, and there's still plenty of surface area to get that tight. I'm not going to tighten it fully on this video, because, this part, because I got to move the knob. But the knob is happy on the flat side. It doesn't care, but you will not gouge out grooves and lines in your top panel if you install these with a flat side up. All right, let's see what this TBX really sounds like through a real mic. I'm going to turn it on now, and you're going to hear a hum as it powers on, and the output tubes begin to draw current. And then that hum is going to fade down as each pair of output tube settles in and draws its normal amount of current, and there'll be a balance between the two pairs. If you have a Vox or other cathode biased amp and you have a hum in the output, regardless of the channel volumes, odds are you have mismatched output tubes. Tube matching is always important in fixed bias and cathode biased amps, but it's really crucial in cathode biased amps where the currents tend to be a little bit hotter. Side note, I was talking to a client yesterday, and there's a very common misconception thank you Mesa Boogie, that there is fixed bias, there's adjustable bias, and there's cathode bias. There's only cathode bias and fixed bias in most guitar amps. Mesa Boogie has non-adjustable fixed bias. Marshall, Fender, most brands have adjustable fixed bias. So fixed bias does not mean that you cannot adjust it. Most cathode biased amps are not adjustable by the user or a tech without changing out the physical resistor, which is what I've done in this. But anyway, let's power it on and listen to that hum. This is the exciting part. Here it comes. There it is. And it's dropping down. And now you have the normal amount of hum in a low filtered AC30. And given that 3 of the preamp tubes in the, actually only 2 of the preamp tubes in the vibrato channel are just some Chinese stuff I had laying around, the noise floor with all the volumes off is great. I've got a Tungsol 12AU7 in V3, if you number the tubes from the left, the preamp tubes. V1 and V2 are just some generic Chinese, and they work fine. In V3 and V5, V4 and V6, which is the preamp tube for normal and top boost, and the phase inverter, I've got some Mullard CV4004s, and in V5, which is just used for the top boost circuit with its cathode follower, I've got a JJ ECC83 because the JJs handle that cathode voltage much better than most Russians tubes do. Anyway, let's start with that vibrato channel that I mentioned before in terms of the vibrato depth. It's hard to judge pitch when the vibrato is going crazy like that. So that's that channel, and it's cool. It's groovy, man. Can you dig it? It's a very dated sound, but still very useful for most of us. The stock circuit in this only has 3 speeds, has 2 sounds, not a ton of gain. I mean, I had the channel volume up at about 3 o'clock, but it's a cool thing. Let's move on to the normal channel. So my hands are still sleepy for some reason, but the channel sounds good. It has less gain than the top boost channel because it only has a single triode before it hits the phase inverter. So with single coils, I'm losing my switch tip. That's a personal problem. With single coils, it breaks up later. Takes pedals really well, and you can push it some more. This is what happens when you get rid of all that awful buzz. You get pure notes, and the guitar and the amp want to sing together. If I were a hot shit country guitarist, this would be awesome. This and that would be awesome. I am not a hot shit country guitarist. I'm only a hot shit polka guitarist, and there's just not much call for that. I never have a gig. Anyway, before I go on something else, I want to show what Steve showed in that little video, the end of the video on the Vox pacemaker. And I've got a notch filter built into this, a Cocteau filter, which is a lot of fun when an amp's right on the verge of breakup. Goes to. It's just a little resonant peak trick with a pickup. But it's a fun alternative just to get some of that, some Beck stuff, and as Steve demonstrated with the Starman bit, all that great Ziggy Stardust kind of era stuff. Kind of cool for some early Steely Dan stuff too. It really depends on the amp. You won't get any joy with this with a Fender Princeton on a clean sound. But through a Marshall or a cranked Vox, it's nice. But you can always go back to stock. Let's go to the top boost channel. Well, let's dial it in first. I'm listening to the mid interaction here. That's about where I want it. That sounds really different with delay. Anyway, it's all there. If you use the right pick, you have all the delays set up, a little bit of a preamp. You know, you don't even need too much of that just to get that vibe, just to smack the hell out of things with single coils. This amp is just great at. And I didn't get the right pick for this. Note decay is a crucial part of how amps work, and it's something that gets overlooked a lot. At some point, I'm going to do a video on using effects in front of an amp like this, because for Edge, for Page, for so many guys, Brian May, Gilmore even, there's a certain thing that delays and reverbs do, particularly delays in front of an amp which has some gain and compression that are just really great. I'll show that in a separate video. I tend not to do effects on this channel because I'm talking about amplifiers or the interaction between the amplifier and the guitar. So 99% of the time, it's a straight cable. There's not going to be any EQ or compression or processing on the mic here. You're pretty much hearing what's happening in the room. But when it comes to old Voxes and old Marshalls and Fenders, for that matter, there are some really cool things that effects do in conjunction with the whole system, as you know, from pickup to the speaker and interacting back with the pickup, that gets overlooked these days. And people always want an effects loop and everything to be, you know, perfect. And so much great music lies in the cracks between perfect and what just sounds cool. So I'll show that in another video. But I think this gives a real good sense of how this amp is sounding right now. I mean, it's fun, and no matter what style you play, this amp will work for you. If a great blues guitarist were here, this would be a great blues amp. If a great country guitarist was here, this would be a great country amp. If a Zepp fiend were here, this and a fuzz and a wah, you know, go for it. Do the entire first 3 Zepp albums with this, especially Physical Graffiti, which I suspect is mostly one of these. Though I believe that was the middle pickup on a Strat. But anyway, I'm going to stop this here. I think the owner's going to be thrilled. I would be. This just sounds so good, looks so great. It's always looked great, but now it sounds good. So that's a nice change after 30-something years.